Okay, everything is being recorded.
Paul and Luke, if you're okay, we'll give it maybe just an extra minute or two here since I know the last one kind of ran right up against this one. So we'll give it just a moment and then we'll introduce you.
Sure.
That works for me.
Is my background the right way or is it inverted?
It's the right way. It's just gigantic.
Whoa. Okay. So that's okay because we have a really huge idea we're going to talk about.
I know you totally did that on purpose.
Absolutely. So I almost never use Zoom. I use Teams for everything. So this is totally like every time I use it, I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, right, Zoom. Where are the buttons again? Dave, I'm going to paste a quick hyperlink into the chat to a survey that we want to have the attendees fill out at some point. I should probably do that right at the end. I'll do that at the end, otherwise it'll get buried in comments.
Yeah, and I think if they join after you post it, I don't think it shows up either. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I should definitely do that at the end.
And if you want to send that to me, I can post it for you at the end if you want, or either way.
Okay. Yeah, I've got it in my clipboard. I'll just paste it in quick. Let me go ahead and do a screen share so I can pick the right one. Oh, wait. Can you do enable screen sharing for me, please?
I think McKenna, I think, has that capability. She's the Andrew and her are the host and co-host. So McKenna, can you make Luke a co-host as well?
I can try. I think Andrew's the host. I think he might have to do it.
Okay. You have he said to text him, so you might need to.
Okay.
I'm just a little guest over here, so I don't have any access to do anything. McKenna, have you tried to make them co-host at all, or is it not letting you?
It won't let me. It lets me put him in a waiting room. That's not helpful, though.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We're working through the usual technical bugs that happen sometimes.
Luke, it did pop up on screen that you are now co-host.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And Paul, do you need it as well, or are you guys good with? Okay. Yep. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So good almost afternoon, and welcome to the Lunch and Learn session of the Creation Track, the Hatched Conference. My name is Dave McCall. I'm a member of both the Innovation Advisory Team and the Hatched Planning Team. I'll be monitoring our time today, trying to keep us on time, and also monitoring the chat. So if you put things in the chat, I will try to monitor those and ask those at the appropriate time. Just so you know, the session is being recorded for future use. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce Luke Hedman and Paul Zube. They will be presenting Back to the Future, an audacious experiment in integrated education. I will turn it over to you now, Luke.
Great, excellent. Are you guys all seeing the screen? Should see a sweet DeLorean there. Cool. Yep. So the reason why Paul and I picked this particular title was more than because it's an awesome movie, but we're actually going to ask you to do a little bit of dreaming with us. We're going to have to ask you to dispense with your conception of reality for a second. This seems a little sci-fi, to be honest, what we're about to share with you, but also the time travel analogy goes a little bit deeper. We're talking about something that's not new. We didn't actually come up with this, at least not all of it. Higher education as it is right now is actually the thing that's new. The way that higher ed runs is, believe it or not, always the way that it has been run. It's been done differently in the past, distant past, in fact. So what we're going to propose to you today is going to have some elements of things that are really quite old. For example, some of the philosophers and great thinkers of the day, polymaths and so on and so forth, like Aristotle and Pythagoras, the way that they treated higher education was different than the way we do it now. Instead of compartmentalized classes in sort of a rigid structure, it was a more flexible relationship between the student, the teacher, and the thing that was being learned. And so those three together were, in a malleable, flexible kind of thing. And so what we're proposing today is some elements of something that's actually pretty old.
And because of that, right, because it is a slightly different thing than what maybe we're currently doing, for right now, like we're hoping to have a lot of really good discussions, not just today at the end of this presentation, but also continuing after Hatched of like how we might be able to make this experiment work out. But as a starting spot, as we're just kind of trying to establish what we're trying to achieve, let's assume for a second that all of our barriers can be removed, right? So we're going to have to go to a place of suspension of disbelief. So because of this, kind of the ideas or the difficulties of kind of standalone class structure and how that might get changed, how our teaching contracts, kind of labor disputes, all that type of stuff, like we have to recognize that those are going to be real barriers that are going to have to be overcome if we're going to kind of go forward with this type of stuff. The idea of transfer credits, all that, right? There are real meaningful discussions that have to happen about how we might be able to make some real meaningful, innovative change in kind of how we go about getting our content across to students and how we do our work as faculty. But for this presentation, we're at least for now going to ask you to just kind of maintain a little bubble of imagination that this is a thing that we can maybe pull off, even if it ends up being a little bit of an incremental way of pulling it off. So now that we have all been prepped to suspend our disbelief, I'm going to have Luke move us right back into kind of the experiences that we already have that we might be very familiar with.
Okay, so before Paul and I pitch to you this kind of crazy idea, we're building up a lot of suspense here, right? This is kind of our strategy. We have to explain a little bit about why we think there's a problem that needs to be solved here. And so you're going to see some timelines. We've got a current model and then a proposed model timeline. And they're very different. And so we need to describe why we think the current one has some things that could be better. We're not saying that it's completely broke because we're all here. It works to an extent, right? But there are some critical failure points in the way that higher ed works right now. So what we have here are 2 semesters separated by a break. And we've got compartmentalized classes shown by these blue boxes. And through those classes, we have sort of these curves drawn. Those curves represent a student's level of skill in a particular topic, whether it's a technical skill, a core class, a gen ed skill, whatever it happens to be. That's their level of skill for that particular thing. And if you notice, all these classes have like a beginning class over here in this semester, and then there's a summer, and then here's like the follow-on class. You might think of these as like prereqs, right? So this is a prereq class for whatever it is over here, whether it's technical, non-technical, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But this is kind of what happens. And the top sort of curve, this top trend line, is the way things are supposed to go in the current model. So a student comes in with a certain level of skill, and it's going to increase, hopefully steadily, throughout their time in that particular semester, right? Like this is what we're trying to do. We take them from one skill level, we give them some practice, we give them some knowledge, we give them some experience, they get better at that. And then they go into a break. Maybe this is even just a break between semesters. Maybe it's a summer. For some of our classes, this is like a multi-year span because something happened. Maybe it was family related or work related or financial or whatever. And we know from a lot of social science and cognitive science that knowledge for a lot of things decays over time. So that slope, unfortunately, has an inflection point and starts to go down. The student is forgetting some of the skill if they're not applying it. They go into then the next semester where there's the follow-on class to whatever that skill was. They enter at some level and hopefully they go up and then they graduate. And so through a series of semesters, we eventually get this sort of roller coaster effect where at the end, we're graduating students who have an elevated level of skill. That's the ideal. Like our current system can do nothing better than that, right? That's when it's working perfectly. And it has some deficiencies. One is that they tend to forget a lot over the breaks. This isn't dig on students. This is just the way our brains work. The middle set of classes shows something that happens very frequently. And for the faculty on the call, this is something that you have observed many times, where a student doesn't do particularly well. They missed the trend line they were supposed to follow, but they passed. They barely passed, but they passed. And then they forget even more. And then they coming into the advanced class, they're underprepared. They're just not ready for that. This trend line shows a student who really pulls it together. They pull it in the extra effort. They do what they need to survive that advanced class. But man, it's a tough experience, right? That this is a beating and nobody enjoys it. And in the end, they still didn't get to the level of skill that they were supposed to coming out of that class. Or maybe they got there, but it was a Herculean effort on the part of the student and sometimes the faculty as well. Then the last set of classes is the worst possible case scenario, where a student doesn't pass a class and they have no option but to drift, further forgetting for however long that break happens to be, and then cycle back around and repeat the class. And this is really the worst case scenario because, as those of you who have some advising responsibilities know, this causes ripple effects. Not only does it cost the student a tremendous amount of money, but also it can delay their progression onto the next class. In worst case scenario, it can even delay their graduation. In certain cases, like my program, for example, where a graduating capstone class is only offered once a year, this actually, a slip of a semester equals a slip of a year if it's critical path to your capstone. So these are things that happen every day in our current model for the student experience. It does work, but it's got some really critical weaknesses to it.
And so also we're kind of looking at this system that we currently live in from a faculty experience as well. And just looking at the participants who are here today, some of you, I get to interact with regularly, but some I don't, but I know your names because I've seen you go through this very process that this slide represents. In a given semester, right? We as faculty, even at a university that is putting a lot of the faculty responsibility into teaching time, there's other things that we have to do. Assessment, coming off of higher learning committee, we know that is an important thing that we are doing here and a thing that we want to continue to improve at. Advising responsibilities, and we know how important faculty-student relationships are in that advising model, kind of a holistic advising model, as opposed to like, here's a sheet of paper and just like, go do the thing. There are kind of projects or research that faculty members are engaged in that add value to the university in a variety of different ways. Many of you I serve on committees with, and these committees are very important for the kind of the governance of the university. It kind of connects to another one of these skill sets, the curriculum development, right? It's what keeps us innovative. It's what makes our programs interesting. It's what creates interesting new classes that are going to attract students to our university or to retain our students. We also might be interested in developing our own skill sets. So I know that in any given year, I'm probably working on one or two skill sets that my previous experience didn't prepare me to do. Many of you may be becoming Zoom experts that you didn't know you were going to have to become a Zoom expert in, right? There's a whole bunch of different professional development responsibilities. The current system probably feels like this to you. Like a whole bunch of responsibilities. Some are falling by the wayside. They're stacked. It is a difficult balance, right? We're being pulled in a lot of different ways. And also because of the way that we kind of have structured our time, we tend to look at some of the more ambitious projects, maybe professional development, curriculum development, our projects, our research, right? That may be a thing we try to shoehorn into summer, right? We don't give it as much attention as it might get. We feel like during a semester, we are incredibly overwhelmed by the different responsibilities we have. We're trying to provide a certain type of experience to our students to help them develop the skills and the knowledge they need to progress through this system that we were just talking about, while also having responsibilities to do committee work and maybe follow up on some of those research projects and making sure that we are developing the relationships with our students in these advising times. Faculty are pulled in a lot of different directions, just like students are pulled in a lot of different directions as a result of kind of the structure that we have. And so Luke and I kind of feel like this puts us at a kind of a choice, right? We have kind of a choice of what to do. So we know on the left, the path that we're currently using, that this does work. Right? Like this is a thing that we do, like we're able to make this balance work. It may seem like too much sometimes, right? But we make this work. Lots of faculty have really innovative assignments, or they do really interesting stuff, or have really great experiences in their classrooms. We know that there are things like service learning opportunities that students get some hands-on experience, some of the stuff that, from our founding, right, that was a very important component that Woodbridge Ferris kind of pushed. We know that we're always trying to refine these course outcomes and what we're trying to achieve. But much of this stuff happens in a silo. And that silo can show up in a variety of ways. From kind of a faculty perspective, right? The innovation happens kind of on my shoulders, right? In my classroom. I need to make sure that my class is accomplishing what my class is doing. That silo could also be the department, right? We as a department kind of collaborate. We come up with a schedule. Maybe we're working on our program, right? But still that's in a silo perspective. Or maybe that silo is even just in our college, right? So different colleges have slightly different perspectives on what type of knowledge or skills are valuable or not valuable. As a university, we kind of know of that discussion and kind of where that shows up. But ultimately, the way that we do things kind of currently keeps us in these silos, even though sometimes those silos can be really interesting, productive places. In some ways, much of what we're hearing about today during Hatched is about the really cool stuff that people are doing in the system that we're currently using, right? It's like, so there's no merit here. But Luke and I think that there could be another way, right? And kind of alluding back to this title, right? Even with some rose-colored glasses, right? Because we certainly know about access and all that. There was maybe a model that was more collaborative in nature, where a topic wasn't learned all by itself. So I didn't learn algebra. Maybe I learned algebra plus something else that I was trying to solve some type of problem, right? So people kind of collaborated with one another. The curriculum that we were trying to deal with, or the skill sets that people were trying to develop, were much more integrated, right? So I'm not trying to learn one set of skills divorced from another set of skills. And we know that this is really beneficial when we kind of do this collaborative and integrative approach, just from like what we know about learning, right? The evidence about learning. We know that human beings do a better job of learning information and making sense of information and making that information meaningful if I'm collaborating around that. I also know that when I'm learning things in a variety of contexts, right, as opposed to an isolated context, I do a much better job with overcoming what is known as the inert knowledge problem, right? So this idea of I learned something in one context and I'm unable to apply that style of thinking or that approach to thinking in another context. For those of you who are kind of in the classroom, you may have seen evidence of this inert knowledge problem where you have another student that you've worked with in a previous semester and they could do the skill in that one class. And then in the very next class, they're not doing that skill, even though it applies to the class you're talking about or the class that you're teaching, because it's a different context, right? So I have seen this kind of firsthand as a public speaking instructor. I have students who do a great job with their speeches in their public speaking class. Then I see them in another class and they're not doing the things that they do in the public speaking class because that's not how speeches are done. That's how speeches are done in public speaking, right? So this kind of division of where I'm learning things and what context it applies to. If I take a more integrative approach, we know that people are better at overcoming that inert knowledge problem. And ultimately, I think also the kind of approach that we're taking right now, we can see there's being a difference between learning versus training. I think we are very oriented towards training right now, and we could maybe with a collaborative approach and an integrative approach also focus on learning, right? It is not necessarily our ability, so it's outside of our ability to produce finished products at the end of a 4-year undergraduate degree. Instead, we're giving them tools and skills to know how they learn themselves and how they are able to acquire additional skills, apply different types of thought patterns to different types of problems, right? And so we kind of feel like a different system that encourages this collaboration and encourages an integration of different skill sets taught simultaneously would be of benefit.
So all that sounds really well and good. I think a lot of us have experience with some of those like critical deficiencies in the way things are done right now. Not to say that innovative things are not being done, but they happen at an extremely high cost of faculty and staff and student effort, right? That they're these massive outpourings of creativity that are required for just very, very small gains. It would be a lot easier to implement some of these things if we had a totally different framework. And so that's what Paul and I are kind of proposing here, is that we take that existing structure we showed you a second ago and basically rip it all to pieces. And when we put it back together, it might look something kind of like this. So this looks like an eye chart, but let me walk you through this. And I think you'll see sort of schematically what we're talking about. The first thing about reality that we want you to ball up and throw away is a semester structure. So take semesters, take that out of the 12-month calendar, and instead replace them with shorter, what we're calling modules, and shorter breaks. So we don't really know how this maps onto a calendar year yet. There's a couple of different ways you could do the division there, but the modules maybe grossly represent semesters, and then the breaks are shorter. So then there's just more modules per year, let's say. And that does a few things for us. One is it lets us have shorter breaks, therefore there's less time for knowledge to decay. That part's pretty straightforward. But let's zoom in on the modules for an example, and we'll see that there's more sophisticated stuff going on. The modules themselves, what we're proposing is we divide those into basically 2 phases. A long phase called a forge, followed by a short phase called refine. And those don't contain classes. Instead, those contain experiences. And these experiences are multi-skill kinds of tasks. You could think of them as a project, but maybe not all projects. And they involve more than just one particular compartmentalized skill set. So maybe an experience for a student in my program, product design, maybe this has some elements of engineering, maybe it has some elements of computer design, maybe it has some elements of communication or technical presentation, maybe it has some elements of writing. Those things are all put together into an experience, and they're put together by not just a single faculty member, but a team of faculty. And so an experience might be 25% CAD, 50% some kind of engineering fundamental, and then another 25% technical professional communication. So those 3 different areas represented by 3 different faculty members on a team work together to construct the design for this experience. Students go through it. They've got content deliveries in there, assessment of individual skills is in there, team-based stuff is in there, and it's a thing that takes their skill level from the entry point and raises it, just like a class does right now. So that part's really not that different from what we do right now, but it doesn't take the entire module. Partway through the module, that experience ends, and what happens right here is really important. The faculty team assesses each one of the students and their performance during the experience, and they get one of 2 options. They either get to do what's called an explore, or they get to do an improve. Explore is for the student who did really well at a particular learning outcome, and they get to take those things deeper. So these are predefined assignments or maybe group projects or whatever that is going to give the student more time to explore deeper topics, maybe take a concept further, maybe do some research, something along those lines. They're taking those concepts and going deeper. So the trend line continues up. We know from memory and retention science that when you learn something, you encode it and then retrieve it, that helps concrete those concepts in your brain. It's just the way that our brains are designed to work. That means by the time you get to the end of the module and you enter your break period, you've already encoded and retrieved that knowledge at least once, which means it's going to have more staying power. The forgetting curve is going to be more shallow. And so going into the next module, the knowledge has decayed less. It's also a shorter break so that it doesn't have as much time. So I go straight into the next experience, and this top trend line kind of shows the ideal, where each experience is followed by an explore phase, and the knowledge just continues to go up. But what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if for some reason a student gets off track? Well, that would be what happens right here. There are legit reasons for a student to not do well in an experience. Like we said, maybe there's family stuff, maybe there's health stuff, maybe it's financial or work or whatever. They get off track. That happens. Right now, as we looked at previously with the existing structure, there really is not a great way to recover from that. That's where the improve comes in. So if this happens to a student during the experience, they miss the trend line, like they're not doing well, the assessments are showing that they're not getting particular things. Maybe it's a technical thing, maybe it's a gen ed thing, maybe it's both. Whatever it happens to be, when they exit that experience, the assessment of the faculty is, okay, instead of going deeper, you need to remediate. And so they go back, and for the refine phase, they get a chance to fix the problem. They get to another shot at it to get those basic skills and to get back onto track. Okay, this is not a Herculean effort as much because it's designed for this purpose. And we realized that this is not bulletproof, right? That the student could still completely blow off the improve, the curve could just fall off the bottom and they could fail. That's never going to be completely preventable. But this already provides at least double the number of opportunities to get back on track that the current system gives you. So from the student experience, this is more durable. We think it probably will be more fun. And it seems like you can map, instead of learning objectives compartmentalized by class, you now get to map the learning outcomes across an entire student experience. However many years they're going to be here, you get to break up all of the objectives and you get to figure out where they go, where the synergies align with other topics that they need to talk about. And that we think will help really solve the inner knowledge problem. So this is kind of what the proposed model would look like from the student perspective.
Then on the faculty side, we kind of feel like this rearranging of time and also this collaborative approach also has some benefits and creates a better working environment for people to be able to accomplish the various types of tasks that faculty have. So again, the forage period is going to be pretty teaching intensive, but instead of an individual having to be doing kind of all of the teaching for all of the students, like our current system creates, you would be doing some team teaching stuff where there are obviously, like we mentioned, barriers to this, but here is a way that we can kind of collaboratively provide students with a variety of different kind of interdisciplinary outcomes to achieve a variety of things through this Forge experience. The refine period is also, in addition to giving students an ability to do more of something when they're doing well, or to in some ways remediate when they need that remediation on certain outcomes, that also is designed to be somewhat autonomous. We know that autonomous learning is an important skill set for students to be developing. And so this refine period, because it is shorter, it's following right up on a Forge, right? That has some of that autonomous learning capabilities. The autonomous learning gives us an opportunity to, as faculty and staff, do some of the kind of non-teaching stuff that supports teaching and supports what happens at the university at the same time. And so the assessment stuff can be occurring during that refining. That advising can be happening during that refining. Maybe in a totally perfect world, right? Because we're talking about this collaborative approach, right? It's not just the faculty members who are working with a cohort that are collaborating with each other, but that this advising is also collaborative, where the student also is involved in their own advising, right? They can do some reflection before they go into a refine period, right? So they are also kind of assisting and seeing the value of their own assessment and their own trajectory when it comes to advising. We also, by having kind of shorter breaks for students, that also creates some opportunities for students to pursue some of those other things that make faculty interesting people to interact with, or skillful people, right, for faculty and staff to kind of develop those skills to help do that committee work and that governance work without having the other layers of responsibilities happening concurrently, right? So we can kind of spread this stuff out, right? So teamwork helps spread out the burden off of individual shoulders, as well as kind of having a different ebb and flow cycle to kind of periods of time creates more space for the valuable work that faculty do in and outside of the classroom to help students achieve the goals that they have, and also to help Ferris State University to be the type of university that we would like it to be. It might be hidden by all of the faces if your screen is set up like mine, but on the very far right of this slide, you'll see that one of those breaks has a big old red bar through it that says actual break. And so while students are kind of doing this module and break cycle, faculty may not be doing that quite as frequently, but we could have actual meaningful real breaks, right? Everyone knows that this is a kind of shutdown period. It is an important part of kind of doing work to know when you can kind of turn off. I know that for many of my friends who are faculty and staff at Ferris, right, some of us are engaged all of the time. That's not always the healthiest thing for people to be doing. It also makes it very difficult to kind of coordinate things, right? So for those of us who like to take advantage of the programming that things like the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning produce, right? If we knew that there were kind of break times for students, but not for faculty, versus break time for everybody, right? We could kind of schedule some of that professional development stuff, some of those research project stuff, right? But having a kind of a known actual stop time, good for kind of the workforce, good for morale, good for innovation, good for coordination. So we see this as being both beneficial as far as a student experience, as Luke was talking about, when it comes to kind of that forge and refine cycle, but also by doing different types of things in a different period of time for faculty, we can see that faculty are able to accomplish many of the tasks that we're already expected to do, maybe more effectively in a less overwhelming type of way, which means that we would hopefully see increasing quality of things like curriculum, assessment, committees, governance, research projects, professional development, advising, and teaching, right? All of these things, we could see an improvement of if we have kind of more time to dedicate specifically to certain things instead of having to do some of the balancing act that we currently do.
All right, so we recognize that there are some massive barriers that would have to be removed in order for something that systemic to occur. Really large elephants in the room include things like assessment and transfer credit and faculty loads and contracts and compensation and how do you graduate something, like what do they graduate with? How do we make sure that's equivalent to what the Higher Learning Commission needs and what the state requires and so on and so forth. So there are some really big challenges to this, but we also think that there is a glimmer of hope here. And so what we would like to propose is basically two things. One is to develop an experiment. And so we don't know where or what program or when or anything, but I think there are some pretty good candidates here. And it might look something kind of like this. We find a program that can integrate some of their core classes with the sort of most synergistically aligned gen ed courses. So things like communication and writing and things of that nature. And we can take those skills, those learning outcomes that have to come from both of those very important types of classes. And we can map them together into an experience like this. It's similar to doing a linked course, which has been done in the past, but it's like linked course plus. And so we design what that merged course would look like, get permission to run some kind of an experiment. No idea how this is going to work with assessment and how this is going to work with accreditation and all that stuff, but offer it as many times as we can so that we can get a good data set. What worked? What did not work? What were the barriers we didn't see? And what do we need to change? And basically just do this experiment. Is it going to be messy? Yeah, it's going to be a terrible mess, but we're going to learn from that mess. And I think that there's some very real value that could come from something like this. In order to run this experiment, though, we need some help. And so that's why kind of our takeaway from this, and then we're going to transition over to kind of just like discussion time, is we need to form a team. In a second, I'm going to paste a link into the Zoom chat that'll take you to a very short form, Microsoft form, to fill out if you are at all interested in discussing this in the future. And so basically we'll just take that list of people who are kind of interested. I didn't want to assume that everybody who participated in this session was interested in that. So that's why we're not just going to use the attendance roster. So don't feel like we're going to spam you or something if you're like, those guys are nuts. We're not doing anything with them. Just fill out this form if you're at all interested. We'll have some kind of a discussion in the future. Probably pull in some administration so that we can figure out how do we develop some kind of a scalable experiment for doing this sort of thing, see if it's even technically possible. There might be some barriers that are completely insurmountable right now, and what we need to do is wait. Or maybe we need to secure some funding first, or maybe we just need to put together the team so that it's ready to go. We're not sure exactly what that would be, but step one is to put a team together. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share and I'll paste in that link, but let's just talk about it. What are the things that are maybe not so much challenges? The challenges is a legit thing to discuss, but maybe more like, what would this look like? What would this look like for your discipline? What role could you play in this? And what are the alignments that you can see through the haze of the existing structure where there's something that could be possible with your contributions?
Great stuff, Luke and Paul. And as Luke said, feel free to jump in with questions you may have or points that you want to maybe talk about. You can also post them in the chat. One thing, I'll get us started. I know Monica's in here as well. When we teach some developmental courses and some kind of student success courses, I could see maybe possibly working in as that improve function, for the students that just aren't kind of getting it to kind of help teach them some of those skills that they may be lacking to, just general college skills that might help them advance a little bit quicker in some of those other core courses. So nice. Other questions or thoughts?
They think we're crazy, Paul.
Well, I mean, we are crazy.
True.
This is Monica. I don't think you're crazy. I think it's going to take a mind shift in teaching. And I think this is innovative. And I've been, Dave and I and Kristen Connolly have been talking about doing stuff like this in our department for a long period of time, just because I think we need to get away from some of the modeling we have done for so many years, and it's not working for the new generation of students, and we need to think outside the box. And I really would like to be part of something like this.
Very cool. One thing we didn't mention in the presentation, but there might be a larger impetus for having this sort of discussion now, and that is that there's really no set in stone law of nature that says higher ed as it exists right now is even sustainable. So it kind of behooves us as an industry to be thinking about maybe there's a better way than what we do right now. The institution that finds that better way first, there's an incentive there.
And I did see Anne's contribution in the chat. If you want to get real crazy, if you'll indulge my real crazy for a moment, I've kind of thrown around ideas of, so let's say that this is a 15 credit experience, right? That's just what you do, right? You do one experience. It's 15 credits. You have like 4 faculty that are involved in that, right? And that's how we kind of sell higher education. Instead of here's a bunch of courses that you have to link together, instead it's here's a chunk of experiences and your faculty have got your back and have kind of put together some outcomes that experience is going to push you and challenge you on, but that we are kind of selling the chunks, not the classes.
I'll jump in again. Given the model that you kind of proposed there, is this something that would have to start at the beginning of a quote unquote semester, or could students jump in and jump out, primarily jump in at different points? One of the things I've kind of talked about or brought up or heard is, higher ed is one of the very few investments, maybe the only investment that you can only do 2 or 3 times a year. I mean, if I want to go buy a new vehicle, I could go down the road and buy a new vehicle today. I can't do that currently with the traditional model of higher ed. I have to wait until that semester begins. So I wonder if there's opportunity to allow some late start kind of opportunities for students as well.
That's a really good thought.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a thing to consider. Off the top of my head, I could see like if we had, so again, like we're going to go to the land of imagination where everyone's bought in. We have everything kind of, all our T's crossed and our I's dotted. I could definitely see us maybe having faculty teams that are kind of dedicated to, it's hard to find language a little bit. So let's say like first year type courses, right? So we have some faculty teams that like, that's kind of what they do. Maybe they run that kind of entry level module cycle every 3 months, right? So while I couldn't just like a car decide on Saturday, I'm going to go buy a car, there's still going to be some kind of waiting period, but maybe we could offer entry points more frequently because we kind of have these ready to go teams as opposed to kind of having to have these prerequisite cycles, and they can kind of integrate with each other more. Again, just spitballing, which is in some ways, so Luke and I have had a lot of conversations about this, but like we're still at the, let's see what sticks and what overcomes challenges or not. Because I think Luke and I and everyone who's at this presentation is really interested in how can we get our students to get more out of what they're investing in this, more what we think that they should be getting out of it. And like sometimes we're frustrated by the system when we see what our students are getting versus what we want them to, and like how could we structure this stuff better. And so I think we're definitely at let's throw some stuff at the wall. And like Luke said, in this industry, the people who figure out how to make stuff stick and do some new stuff sooner might do better off in the 21st century instead of kind of sticking with a 20th century model.
I think one of the things, I think you guys are right on track. I'm a huge proponent of outcomes-based education, which is exactly what Luke was describing. But one of the things I think that could work is kind of that rolling start point. But even if it's the first, and I'm just spitballing here too, but maybe if it's the first few weeks is all modularized. Okay, so someone jumps in the 3rd week, they got some catch up to do, so maybe you do have multiple start points. And like you said, maybe it's every 3 months, but I always laugh that, oh gosh, if we don't have them in the system by 4th day count. I mean, have you ever tried to get a student in your class during the 2nd week of the semester? I have. Okay. It's ridiculous amount of hoops to jump through, knowing that as a faculty member, I can catch him up or her up in that first couple days. And they're right. They didn't waste 16 weeks, or in our case, a whole year, because that class is only offered once a year. But I also think that I think an easy way to solve part of our problem that ties right into this, and we can have courses do it, is to have 8-week semesters. And I think that's something we could do right now in the current system, is say, for example, that we're going to partner up our public speaking class with and Luke and I know a lot about prototyping, with maybe a CAD prototyping class. Now you're going to pitch your idea. It's going to be a Shark Tank kind of experience, which I do in one of my courses. that you do tie everybody together, at least for that 8-week package. And then maybe the next 8 weeks is, you know, something else that partners together. And that would work in our current system right now. If we get everybody on board, of course.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
I'm 100%. I mean, sign me up. I'm 100% on board with you.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point, Dan, and that is that like experimentally, if we make the modules the right length, they will sort of transplant into the existing structure, at least for the experiment, you know, just to see how that goes. And then if later on we need to, you know, rip up more systemic
Right.
architecture, then so be it. But for right now, yeah, we can kind of like clear out a semester and say, here's our little sample we're gonna try.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I see it looks like Franklin posted something about Full Sail University having a similar module schedule. I'm not familiar with their module schedule. I've seen their commercials and stuff before, but I'm sure that there's some precedent out there for things like this. Paul actually found one at university over in Washington State that seemed to have something similar to this. And that gives us a little bit of confidence that there's at least a glimmer of hope that this can pass all of the sort of regulatory hurdles and things like that. How that all looks, not really sure yet, but that's part of that ongoing discussion, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of to Dave's point is Full Sail does a month by month jump in point. So every month people can jump in and start a program. So that's kind of how they go. But one of the other things that they do is it's basically 12 months. So you're going to school all year round. Now students enjoy it because you're totally immersed in the experience and in the learning, and they do have breaks, but they're definitely not as long. But I definitely think it's a model. But see, this is my question though. So how does you would have to get everybody? I mean, the whole university would have to totally change the structure, and I just don't know how that's possible. How do you get English departments or to change to this model when they're so used to how they've been doing it over all these years?
You may not get the whole university. You might
Well-
just have a secondary section of classes running at different times compared to traditional.
Would you then qualify as for? I mean, um, yeah. Hold on.
Yeah, and so Luke and I have also kind of talked about that problem. Like, would this take the entirety of the
Accreditation.
university, or could you kind of have like, at least for a little bit, a small initiative group? I think like, so again, like pie in the sky, there is possibly, some granting opportunities to support something like this, that a portion of the university could be doing without the whole university doing. Because again, like we mentioned, like the current system isn't like fundamentally broken and our students are getting nothing from this. Like, we're just trying to push maybe here's an opportunity for our students to get more and our faculty to be able to do more in more interesting ways. I think that there are, and like I don't know upper administration structuring well enough, but it seems like we might be able to create some pockets of innovation to maybe try out some of these things, and see experimentally if that works and if it justifies greater adaptation in the future.
That's what I guess my point was I was going to ask about accreditation. So how do we still fall or be qualified for accrediting, as a university, particularly because you would still have to have certain courses and certain coursework that goes along with each program. And so if you don't have all of the university on board, then that's going to be a barrier.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily know if you need to have the courses. I think you need to have the outcomes. So kind of like to Dan's point, it's the outcomes, like, so a program outcome. So like a schematic that I've kind of thrown together was, what would it look like if, one program had like another program's outcome incorporated into it, or like how could we take gen ed and incorporate that in everything, right? So I'm on the gen ed committee. I'm super interested in gen ed not being a side project, but we say it, their core values and their core competencies. I would like to have them be meaningfully core, right? So that I don't just take like a communication class or a culture class at a certain level, but that every single time I'm engaging with my own major, I see the implications of these things in what I'm doing, right? So that kind of outcome orientation as opposed to class orientation, maybe it would take a 6 faculty team to be able to get enough coverage to get a student through a program and through all the accrediting things. Again, like that's just like a maybe number, but a thing that we could maybe explore.
I talked with my program coordinator this morning, and he raised very similar questions. And then he made a really poignant observation. I thought he said, really what you have to assure in the end, as far as the state is concerned and stuff, that their metrics are things like at least this many credit hours equals a bachelor's degree and stuff like that. And so really right now, if we're honest, higher ed takes a lot of those things and we sweep it all under the rug called a diploma, right? We're using this single thing to validate capability across a just very wide variety of different skill sets. And that maybe isn't super useful. Instead, we could then, take this Bachelor's of Science or Bachelor's of Fine Arts or whatever it happens to be. And what we're really validating then is their capabilities in the same learning outcomes. You've got all the same things met, but instead of doing them in little buckets, you'd strung them all end to end. And the analogy that I used from talking with my associate today was, right now we've got these little buckets that are all full of the learning outcomes for each individual class. Take all those buckets, dump them into a big pile, and then map them all out where you're integrating things like communication and writing and so on and so forth into the overarching structure of your entire time at Ferris. And I was thinking, how do we do that for 4 years? And he's like, you don't have to. You could do this with a 2-year, a junior, senior, something like that, where you could do it with people transferring in. There's this really nice dividing line between the first 2 years and the second 2 years where we could like scale down this little project. And in the end, what do you get? Bachelor's degree. How do we get there? Because we did all these learning outcomes. We just didn't do them in compartments. We did them all in strings. And so that's kind of like the best analogy that I could think of mentally to kind of map this for myself.
Awesome. Well, great conversations, everyone. If you have additional thoughts, be sure to fill out the form that Luke put in the chat. And I'm sure we can continue this discussion at another time. We'll give you some time to transition to the next one, maybe clean up after the lunch that you might have been able to have. And also you'll see in the chat, McKenna posted the links to the next session. So a quick, easy hop over to the next one from there. But thank you to our presenters, both Paul and Luke, for this phenomenal idea. I don't think it's too far off base, and with everything we've seen with the shift to remote and everything else, I think we have to continue to stay innovative in thinking about these new ideas. They're not traditional, they're not going to be easy, like Luke said, but I think that's the direction we have to go if we're going to continue to stay competitive and relevant. So awesome job, everyone. And there's a quick link or a quick post there. You got it already, Luke. Thanks. So have a great rest of your HASHED conference, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you very much for coming and indulging our crazy idea.
It was awesome.
See you guys.